That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The rain fell steadily over the training grounds at Sandhurst, the Royal Military Academy's gravel paths turning slick underfoot. It was the kind of persistent drizzle that seeped into collars and chilled the bones, a familiar companion to the cadets' morning parade. The air carried the sharp scent of wet earth and polished leather, mingling with the faint, acrid tang of gun oil from the nearby armory. At precisely 0600 hours, the bugle sounded, its notes cutting through the grey haze like a command from on high. Cadet Sergeant Ellis Harper stood at the front of her platoon, her posture rigid as the others fell into line behind her. At 24, she was older than most of her peers, her face marked by a quiet resolve that set her apart. Her uniform, crisp battle dress, trousers tucked neatly into boots, hung on her slender frame without flourish. No ribbons adorned her chest. No insignia betrayed prior service. She was simply Lance Corporal Harper, transferred in from a peripheral unit, assigned to lead drills for the new intake. The cadets, fresh-faced and eager, eyed her with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Whispers rippled through the ranks like wind over the downs. She didn't fit. Too reserved, too unassuming. Her voice, when she issued orders, was steady but soft, lacking the barked authority they expected from their instructors. "Platoon, attention!" The command came from Colour Sergeant Wilkins, a broad-shouldered veteran with a moustache like a steel brush and eyes that missed nothing. His voice was clipped, carrying the weight of years spent enforcing the Academy's unyielding standards. The cadets snapped to attention, heels striking the wet gravel in unison. Boots echoed across the parade square, a rhythmic thud that drowned out the patter of rain. Wilkins paced the line, his pace deliberate, inspecting each uniform for the slightest imperfection, a crease in a sleeve, a button askew. This was the rhythm of Sandhurst, order imposed through repetition, discipline forged in the mundane. Harper stood motionless, her gaze fixed on a point beyond the square, where the Academy's red brick barracks loomed against the sodden sky. She had arrived 3 weeks prior, her posting unremarkable on paper, a routine reassignment from administrative duties at a regional depot. But the cadets sensed something off-kilter. During evening briefings in the mess hall, they traded glances when she entered, her tray balanced with quiet efficiency. No banter, no complaints about the watery porridge or the endless parade of drill commands. She simply ate, cleared her place, and withdrew to the barracks without a word. That morning, as the platoon formed up for weapons inspection, the tension simmered beneath the surface. Private Ellis, named after some distant relative, or so the rumors went, had been paired with Cadet Reynolds, a lanky youth from Surrey with a penchant for mimicry. Reynolds was the sort who thrived on the camaraderie of mockery, his laughter a shield against the Academy's rigors. As they handled the SA-80 rifles, oiling mechanisms under Wilkins' watchful eye, Reynolds leaned close to Harper. "Steady on, Lance Corporal," he muttered, his tone laced with false deference. "Don't want to scratch the barrel. Wouldn't want to embarrass yourself in front of the colour sergeant." A snicker escaped from the cadet beside him, quickly stifled as Wilkins's head turned, but the damage lingered, a subtle fracture in the line of discipline. Harper's hands moved with practiced precision, stripping the weapon down to its components without a flicker of response. Her fingers, calloused yet steady, betrayed no haste, no irritation. She reassembled it flawlessly, the click of metal on metal the only sound she permitted herself. Wilkins nodded curtly, moving on. "Next section, fall in for bayonet drill." The platoon shifted, boots scraping as they formed ranks on the drill square. The rain intensified, drumming against the canvas awnings of the nearby instruction huts. Harper took her position at the flank, demonstrating the sequence: parry, thrust, guard. Her movements were economical, honed by repetition rather than flair. The cadets followed, their efforts clumsy in comparison, elbows flailing, stances wavering. Reynolds, ever the instigator, exaggerated his form, drawing a sharp rebuke from the sergeant. "Harper," Wilkins called during a brief pause, his voice carrying over the downpour, "demonstrate the advance." She stepped forward without hesitation, her rifle an extension of her arm. The platoon watched as she executed the maneuver, a controlled lunge across the slick ground, boots gripping the gravel, bayonet slicing the air with surgical intent. It was textbook, precise, unadorned. Yet as she returned to line, a murmur rose from the rear ranks. "Show off," someone whispered. Reynolds caught it, amplifying with a low chuckle. "Thinks she's special, does she? Bet she's never seen real action." Harper heard, of course. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly, but her eyes remained forward, locked on the horizon where the Thames misted into view. Silence was her armor, a choice forged long before Sandhurst's gates. The Academy's hierarchy demanded conformity. Deviation invited scrutiny. She had learned that lesson early, in postings where questions were discouraged and records sealed. Wilkins, sensing the undercurrent, barked an order to resume, his presence restoring order like a cold front sweeping the square. By midday, the platoon adjourned to the mess hall, the clatter of benches and cutlery a welcome reprieve from the wet. Steam rose from tureens of stew, the air thick with the aroma of boiled cabbage and strong tea. Harper queued silently, her tray soon laden with the standard fare. As she navigated the crowded benches, a cadet, Jenkins, broad from rugby fields, shifted his foot just enough to catch her boot. The tray tilted, a spoonful of stew splattering across the floor. Laughter erupted, sharp and immediate. "Clumsy, isn't she?" Reynolds quipped, loud enough for the hall to hear. Heads turned, the mockery spreading like ripples on a pond. Jenkins feigned innocence, shrugging as if it were an accident. Harper knelt without a word, retrieving the utensil, her expression unchanging. The colour sergeant at the officers' table glanced over but said nothing. Such incidents were beneath formal notice, tests of resilience in the making. She rose, tray steady once more, and took her seat alone at the end of a bench. The rain hammered the windows, blurring the world outside. In that moment the crack in discipline widened, unnoticed by most. But Harper endured, her silence a testament to the quiet professionalism that defined her. Little did they know, the foundations of her restraint ran deeper than the Academy's traditions, roots tangled in the shadowed halls of Credenhill, where the regiment's secrets were guarded with lethal discretion. The morning's routine had only just begun to unravel. The afternoon sun struggled to pierce the low clouds over Sandhurst, casting a pallid light across the Academy's expansive training fields. The rain had eased to a fine mist, leaving the grass sodden and the air heavy with the scent of damp wool and turned earth. Cadets moved in orderly files from the mess hall back to the drill square, their boots leaving faint imprints in the softening ground. The rhythm of the Academy asserted itself once more, a cadence of clipped commands and synchronized steps, the backbone of British military life. Here, hierarchy was not merely observed, it was the very structure upon which discipline was built. Colour Sergeant Wilkins led the platoon, his stride purposeful, the tails of his tunic brushing against his trousers with each measured pace. Behind him marched the cadets, divided into sections under the watchful eyes of their non-commissioned officers. Lance Corporal Harper fell in at the rear of her group, her position a subtle demotion in the eyes of the younger ranks, close enough to observe, far enough to be overlooked. She carried no resentment in her bearing, her shoulders remained square, her gaze level, fixed on the back of the cadet ahead. The mockery from the mess hall lingered in the air like unspoken smoke, but Wilkins' presence quelled any overt resurgence. He was a fixture of the Academy, risen through the ranks from private to sergeant major in his early days, now entrusted with shaping the officer cadets who would one day command. "Platoon, halt," Wilkins ordered as they reached the edge of the square. The command echoed crisply, met by the sharp scrape of heels on gravel. The cadets formed ranks with mechanical precision, a testament to the morning's drills. Private Reynolds, still flushed from the midday laughter, stood tall in the second row, his chest puffed slightly as if to reclaim some authority. Beside him, Cadet Jenkins exchanged a glance with another private, a fleeting smirk that vanished under Wilkins' inspection. The colour sergeant paced the line, his eyes scanning for lapses. A beret tilted a fraction too far, a trouser cuff not fully tucked. "Standards, gentlemen and lady," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried no warmth but demanded absolute compliance. "This is Sandhurst. We do not tolerate sloppiness, Not in uniform, not in drill, not in conduct. Harper stood at ease in her place, her hands clasped behind her back, fingers interlaced without tension. She had stripped and reassembled more weapons in shadowed armories than these cadets could imagine. But here she was, merely the quiet transfer, the one who blended into the grey. Her competence was evident in the small things, the way she adjusted her stance without prompting, aligning perfectly with the platoon's alignment, the subtle correction she offered to a fumbling cadet during bayonet practice earlier, a murmured, "Elbow in, steady the guard," delivered without emphasis. Yet it went unappreciated, dismissed as rote by those who saw only her lack of flair. The routine resumed with the afternoon's inspection drill. Major Hargrove, a tall officer with a neatly trimmed beard and the bearing of a man who had seen service in distant postings, arrived to oversee. He was flanked by 2 corporals, their notebooks at the ready to record infractions. The major's presence elevated the proceedings. He represented the officer class, the future these cadets aspired to, and his approval was currency in the Academy's unforgiving economy. "Carry on, Colour Sergeant," Hargrove said, his tone even, laced with the polished accent of public school and staff college. Wilkins saluted crisply, then turned to the platoon. "Fall in for personal inspection," Wilkins barked. The cadets straightened further, if such a thing were possible, as Hargrove and his aides moved down the line. They checked kit bags laid out on the grass, boots polished to a gleam, webbing free of dirt, rifles oiled and aligned. Reynolds's section came under scrutiny first. The private's kit was adequate, boots shining, though the soles bore faint scuffs from the morning's exertions. But Jenkins faltered, his bayonet sheath misaligned. Hargrove paused, his eyebrow arching slightly. "Careless, cadet. Remedial drill after stand-down." Jenkins nodded mutely, colour rising in his cheeks. When they reached Harper, the major's gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary. Her kit was impeccable, every buckle fastened with precision. The SA-80 resting barrel up on her ground sheet, its surfaces spotless despite the day's damp. No excess polish, no ostentatious shine, just functional excellence. "Satisfactory, Lance Corporal," Hargrove noted, his voice neutral. Wilkins grunted approval, moving on, but in the ranks behind, whispers stirred again. "Satisfactory? That's all she gets?" Reynolds muttered to the cadet beside him, low enough to evade the sergeant's ear. "Must be pulling strings somewhere. Never seen her sweat it before." The inspection gave way to tactical briefings in the instruction hut, a low-slung building of weathered brick that smelled of chalk dust and stale tea. Inside, the platoon sat on hard benches, facing a blackboard where Wilkins sketched formations, advance in echelon, defensive perimeters. Harper took a seat at the back, her notebook open, pen poised. She contributed only when called upon. Her responses concise, flank security via Overwatch Sergeant, delivered in a voice that carried no challenge, only fact. The cadets around her shifted restlessly, their minds wandering to the evening's freedoms, but she remained absorbed, her posture unchanging. As the session drew to a close, Wilkins assigned duties, Reynolds and Jenkins to clean the armory, a punishment disguised as routine. Harper was tasked with overseeing the platoon ledger, updating attendance and equipment logs in the adjutant's office. It was unglamorous work, the kind that reinforced her image as the administrative shadow, not the soldier. She accepted the order with a nod, rising without protest as the others filed out into the fading light. Outside, the mist had thickened, cloaking the parade square in a soft haze. The distant call of a bugle signaled the approach of evening stand easy, when cadets might gather in the anteroom for a smoke or a quiet word. Harper made her way to the office alone, her boots echoing softly on the concrete path. The building was quiet, lit by the warm glow of desk lamps. She settled at the scarred oak table, flipping open the ledger. Her entries methodical, names ticked, tallies balanced. The room held the faint aroma of ink and aged paper, a sanctuary from the square's scrutiny. Yet even here, isolation bred doubt. Through the window, she caught sight of Reynolds and Jenkins trudging toward the armory, their laughter carrying on the damp air. "You don't belong here," Reynolds had said once during a late-night watch. His words half jest, half probe. She hadn't responded then nor now. Her past was a sealed file, transferred under discretion from units where questions dissolved into classified voids. Credenhill's shadows lingered in her muscle memory, the silent runs through fog-shrouded hills, the weight of unmarked gear. But Sandhurst demanded she bury it deeper. As the clock ticked toward 1800 hours, Harper closed the ledger, her work flawless. She stepped back into the evening chill, the academy's lights flickering on like stars against the encroaching dark. The platoon dispersed to barracks, the day's order restored, but the undercurrents persisted. Wilkins watched from the officers' mess porch, a mug of tea in hand, his expression unreadable. In the rigid world of ranks and routines, Harper's silence was both shield and burden, a quiet competence that invited mockery even as it endured. The academy's traditions held firm, but beneath them, the test of true discipline simmered, waiting for its moment to surface. The evening shadows lengthened across Sandhurst's parade square, the mist from earlier condensing into a chill that settled over the academy like a damp blanket. Lamps flickered to life along the paths, casting pools of yellow light that reflected off the wet gravel. The cadets, released from their duties, converged on the anteroom, a modest hall of panelled wood and threadbare armchairs, where the day's tensions could dissipate in murmurs over mugs of tea or the occasional pipe. The air inside carried the comforting staleness of polished oak and faint tobacco, a brief respite, before lights out enforced the night's discipline. Lance Corporal Harper entered last, her boots leaving faint tracks on the mat at the threshold. She had completed her ledger work without incident, the adjutant's office now silent behind her. The platoon had already gathered in loose clusters, Reynolds and Jenkins at the center, their voices carrying with the easy confidence of youth unchallenged. Others lounged nearby, legs stretched out, uniforms slightly rumpled in the informality of stand easy. Harper paused at the edge, surveying the room with her usual detachment, then moved toward a corner table where a samovar steamed gently. "Tea, Lance Corporal." The offer came from Cadet Morrow, a slight figure from the Midlands with a habit of playing peacemaker. He poured without waiting for her nod, the liquid dark and strong, just as the army preferred. Harper accepted the mug, her fingers wrapping around its warmth, and settled into a chair away from the main group. She sipped slowly, the bitter brew grounding her amid the low hum of conversation. Topics ranged from the morning's drill mishaps to rumors of upcoming field exercises, standard fare laced with the cadets' mix of bravado and uncertainty. Reynolds, spotting her isolation, nudged Jenkins with an elbow. "Look at her, all proper and alone. Thinks she's above it, doesn't she?" His voice was pitched just loud enough to carry, a deliberate thread in the room's tapestry. Jenkins chuckled, leaning back with exaggerated nonchalance. "Must be that administrative posting she came from. Bet she spent her days filing papers while we were out in the mud." The words drew nods from a few others, a ripple of agreement that built on the mess hall's earlier incident. Morrow shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, his eyes flicking toward the door as if hoping for an officer's interruption. Harper kept her gaze on the steam rising from her mug, her posture unchanged, spine straight, shoulders relaxed against the chair's back. She had heard variations of this before, in other units, other bases. The quiet one, the outsider. Her transfer papers listed routine service, nothing to provoke envy or awe. But the barbs stung in their familiarity, a reminder of the walls she had built around memories best left buried. Credenhill's training grounds, with their unrelenting fog and whispered briefings, had taught her that visibility was a vulnerability. Here at Sandhurst, she was content to fade into the ranks, her competence a private matter. The conversation swelled, Reynolds emboldened by the lack of rebuke. He rose, sauntering over with a mug in hand, Jenkins trailing like a shadow. "Mind if we join you, Lance Corporal? Wouldn't want you feeling left out." Reynolds' tone dripped with mock concern, his free hand gesturing broadly as he pulled up a chair uninvited. Jenkins flanked him, blocking the easy exit. The room quieted slightly, ears attuned to the unfolding scene. Harper met Reynolds' eyes briefly, her expression neutral, then returned to her tea. "Carry on," she said simply, her voice even, betraying no invitation or dismissal. But Reynolds pressed, leaning in closer, his elbow brushing the table's edge. "Come on, Harper, you've been here weeks and not a word about yourself. Where'd you really come from? Some desk job in Aldershot? Or are you one of those who washed out of officer training?" Laughter bubbled up from the group, sharper now, as Jenkins added, "Yeah, you move like you've got something to hide. That perfect kit, too perfect. Compensating, are we?" He reached out then as if in jest, grabbing at the sleeve of her tunic to tug it playfully. The fabric pulled taut, the motion rougher than intended, nearly spilling her mug. The room held its breath, the anteroom's warmth turning stifling. Harper's hand steadied the tea without a tremor, but her eyes locked onto Jenkins' grip, a flicker of steel beneath the calm. She did not pull away, did not raise her voice. Instead, she waited, her silence a deliberate barrier. Jenkins released her sleeve with a smirk, stepping back as if it were all in good fun. "Lighten up, we're just having a laugh." Reynolds clapped him on the shoulder, turning to the others. "See, she doesn't belong here. Too stiff for Sandhurst. Should be back at the depot, polishing files." The mockery crested, drawing chuckles from the fringes, but it carried an edge now, public, unignorable. Morrow cleared his throat, a tempting diversion. "Best leave it, lads. Colour sergeant's round soon." Yet the damage settled, a humiliation woven into the evening's fabric. Harper rose smoothly, setting her mug down with care, and excused herself without fanfare. "Good evening," she murmured to no one in particular, her boots echoing softly as she crossed to the door. The cadets watched her go, the laughter fading into awkward murmurs. Outside, the night air bit sharply, the mist beading on her beret as she made for the barracks. In the dim corridor of her block, Harper paused, rolling her sleeve back to inspect the faint crease from Jenkins' grasp. No tear, no mark beyond the ordinary wear of the day. She smoothed it flat, her movements methodical, then proceeded to her bunk. The barracks were quiet, most cadets still in the anteroom, leaving her to the solitude she preferred. She changed into fatigues, the routine a balm, folding her uniform with precision, laying out kit for the morrow. The window overlooked the darkened square, where lamps glowed like distant sentinels. Sandhurst's hierarchy tolerated such tests, resilience forged in the fire of peer judgment. But Harper's restraint ran deeper, rooted in operations where a word could cost lives. As she lay on her bunk, the day's events replayed in measured fragments. The tug on her sleeve, the laughter's bite, the weight of eyes upon her. She closed her eyes, breathing evenly, drawing on the discipline that had carried her through Credenhill's Black Wing. Those unmarked hours in shadowed ranges, where failure was not mocked, but erased. The Academy's injustice was petty by comparison, yet it tested the same core: silence as strength, endurance as honor. Tomorrow would bring more drills, more scrutiny, but she would meet it, as always, unseen, unbroken. The clock in the distance struck 2100 hours, signaling lights out. Harper turned toward the wall, the barracks filling with the shuffle of returning cadets. Whispers filtered through the partitions, echoes of the anteroom's barbs, but she let them wash over her like the earlier rain. In the rigid order of British military life, such moments were fleeting fractures, mended by dawn's routine. Yet beneath the surface, the tension coiled tighter, a quiet defiance waiting for its reckoning. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. Dawn broke over Sandhurst with the reluctance of a reluctant recruit, the sky a uniform slate grey that promised more rain before midday. The bugle pierced the quiet at 5:30 hours, its call summoning the Academy to life with mechanical inevitability. Cadets stirred in their barracks, the scrape of bedsprings and muffled curses blending into the familiar symphony of reveille. Lance Corporal Harper rose without hesitation, her movements fluid in the dim light filtering through the narrow windows. She dressed in silence, the crisp fold of her uniform, a ritual that anchored her amid the night's lingering echoes of mockery. The anteroom's barbs had faded into the barracks' murmurs, but they left a residue, subtle as the dew on the gravel paths outside. By 0600, the platoon assembled on the parade square, the air crisp with the scent of wet grass and distant wood smoke from the cookhouse. Colour Sergeant Wilkins stood at the fore, his whistle poised, ready to enforce the morning's drill. The cadets fell into ranks, their breaths visible in the chill, boots aligning with the precision drilled into them over weeks. Harper took her place in the second row, her posture impeccable, gaze fixed forward. Reynolds and Jenkins stood nearby, their earlier bravado tempered by the sergeant's presence, though a sidelong glance between them carried the remnants of last night's jest. The square stretched out, bordered by the academy's stone facades, where ivy clung damply to the brickwork. "Platoon, attention!" Wilkins' command cut through the hush, heels striking gravel in unison. The rhythm built as they marched, a steady cadence that echoed off the surrounding buildings. Harper matched it flawlessly, her steps measured, arms swinging in tight arcs. No flourish, no deviation, just the quiet efficiency that had drawn the cadets' disdain. As the drill progressed to quick time, then double, the platoon wheeled across the square, formations shifting under Wilkins' barked corrections. "Eyes front. Swing those arms." The colour sergeant's voice was a rod of iron, brooking no lapses. Midway through the manoeuvre, a low rumble approached from the perimeter road, a pair of unmarked Land Rovers, their tyres crunching over the gravel approach. The vehicles pulled to a halt at the edge of the square, doors opening with restrained clicks. Out stepped a small contingent. 4 figures in subdued civilian attire, overlaid with subtle military bearing. Dark wool coats over collared shirts, trousers pressed to a knife edge, boots polished but unassuming. At their head was a man in his late 40s, tall and spare, with close-cropped hair greying at the temples, and eyes that scanned the scene without apparent effort. No badges marked them, no ranks declared. They were visitors from Hereford, the SAS contingent attached for a joint assessment exercise, their presence announced only the day prior in a terse memo. Major Hargrove, alerted by an aide, broke from the officer's line to greet them. "Captain Thorne," he said, saluting crisply. The lead figure, Captain Elias Thorne, though his rank was whispered rather than worn, returned the salute with a nod, his posture still as a sentinel. "Major, we're here for the tactical review, won't interfere." His voice was low, measured, carrying the understated authority of one who commanded without volume. The group moved to the sidelines, positioning themselves under the eaves of the instruction block, where they could observe without intrusion. Wilkins, catching the shift, adjusted the drill to accommodate, steering the platoon toward a flanking march that brought them closer to the observers. Harper, in her line, executed the turn with the same unerring precision, her boot heels pivoting on the damp gravel without a slip. As the platoon passed within 10 paces, Thorne's gaze settled on her, not overtly, but with the focus of a man attuned to details others missed. It was fleeting, the way her shoulders held steady under the pack's weight, the subtle economy of her stride, reminiscent of the regiment's long patrols through Welsh uplands. She did not notice, her eyes locked on the cadet ahead, but the captain's companion, a warrant officer with a faint scar along his jaw, leaned in slightly, murmuring something inaudible. Thorne's expression remained impassive, a mask of professional detachment. The drill concluded with a halt and stand at ease, the platoon breathing evenly as Wilkins called for water break. Cadets dispersed in orderly fashion to the canteen tents, filling canteens from the standpipes, the trickle of water mingling with subdued chatter. Harper lingered at the edge, adjusting her webbing with methodical care, her fingers deft on the buckles. Reynolds, wiping sweat from his brow, shot her a glance. "Still playing the statue, Harper? Even the visitors must think you're odd." Jenkins snorted, but their words trailed off as Hargrove approached the SAS group, gesturing toward the platoon. Thorne excused himself from the conversation, stepping onto the square with unobtrusive grace. He moved parallel to the cadets, ostensibly inspecting the terrain for the upcoming exercise, but his path converged with Harper's position. As she bent to secure a loose strap on her boot, her sleeve rode up slightly, exposing the edge of a tattoo on her inner forearm, a simple winged dagger, inked in faded black, the symbol of the SAS selection barely visible beneath the cuff. Thorne paused, mid-stride, his boot halting on the gravel without a sound. He did not stare. Instead, he stood still, the recognition flickering in his eyes like a shadow crossing the sun. Harper straightened, sensing the proximity, and met his gaze briefly. No words passed, no nod exchanged, just a moment of mutual stillness, heavy with unspoken history. The tattoo vanished as she adjusted her sleeve, but Thorne's posture shifted imperceptibly, a fraction straighter, his hands clasping behind his back in the regiment's habitual at ease. He continued on, rejoining his group without comment, but the warrant officer noted it, his own eyes narrowing as he tracked Harper's form. The morning progressed to the range, a short march across the fields where the mist clung to the gorse. The SAS observers followed at a distance, their Land Rovers trailing like silent escorts. On the firing point, Wilkins oversaw the SA-80 familiarization, cadets prone in the butts, targets popping up at intervals. Harper took her turn last in the section, settling into the firing position with the ease of long practice. Her breaths were controlled, cheek weld perfect, trigger squeeze smooth. The shots rang out, crack, 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 each round centering the silhouette without recoil's betrayal. 12 for 12, no fanfare. From the observation mound, Thorne watched through binoculars, not the targets, but her form. The steady hold, the minimal movement between shots, hallmarks of Credenhill's Black Wing where recruits were winnowed in the shadows of unmarked ranges. The warrant officer beside him lowered his own glasses. "That one? Seen it before?" Thorne nodded once, his voice a murmur lost in the wind. "Brevity. She's one of ours." No elaboration, the regiment spoke in certainties, not anecdotes. As the platoon regrouped for debrief, Hargrove invited the visitors to address the cadets on tactical nuances. Thorne declined the podium, opting instead for a quiet circuit of the line, his presence a subtle pressure. He paused near Harper again, this time as she cleaned her barrel, the rod sliding through with oiled precision. "Carry on," he said softly, the words directed at the group but his eyes on her work. She nodded, continuing without pause, but the exchange registered, a hint of the discipline that bound them, forged in classified briefs and silent ops. The cadets, oblivious, shuffled through their routines, Reynolds muttering about the spooks from Hereford, adding unnecessary scrutiny. But Thorne's stillness conveyed more, a quiet acknowledgement, building like mist over the downs. Wilkins dismissed the platoon for lunch, the tramp of boots receding toward the mess. Harper fell in at the rear, her stride unchanged, but now under the weight of observed shadows. The SAS group's arrival had introduced no fanfare, only the subtle tension of recognition, a crack in the academy's rigid facade. In the cold air of Sandhurst, where hierarchies held sway, the visitor's gaze promised a reckoning, silent as the rain that began to fall once more. The afternoon session on the range stretched into the lengthening shadows, the fine rain resuming its patter against the sandbagged butts and the cadets' oilskin covers. The air hung heavy with the sharp bite of cordite and the earthy dampness of the Surrey hills, where the academy's firing points overlooked valleys shrouded in mist. Colour Sergeant Wilkins directed the platoon through advanced marksmanship drills, his commands crisp against the intermittent crack of SA-80 rounds. The cadets lay prone in the firing lanes, their forms etched in concentration, breaths measured to steady the sights. Lance Corporal Harper occupied the end position, her rifle steady on the bipod, the stock firm against her shoulder. She fired in controlled bursts, 3 rounds, pause, adjust, each grouping tight on the distant silhouette, the impacts punching neat clusters in the target's torso. From the observation mound, Captain Thorne and his warrant officer maintained their vigil, their figures indistinct against the overcast sky. They had shed their coats, revealing subdued combat tunics beneath, the fabric unmarked, save for the faint wear of field service. Thorne's eyes traced the platoon's progress, not with the scrutiny of a critic, but with the quiet assessment of one who knew the cost of imperfection. The warrant officer, Sergeant Hale, shifted beside him, his scarred jaw tightening as Harper transitioned to the kneeling position. "That form," Hale murmured, voice barely rising above the wind. "Black Wing, no doubt." Thorne inclined his head fractionally, his gaze unwavering. He had seen it in the Welsh Brecons during selections where candidates vanished into the fog, emerging only if they endured. Harper's movements echoed that endurance. No wasted motion, no telltale flinch under recoil. Wilkins called a halt for equipment check, the platoon rising to clear barrels and inspect mechanisms under his watchful eye. Cadets gathered their brass, the metallic clink mingling with subdued talk of scores and windage. Reynolds, his own grouping scattered wider than he'd admit, slung his rifle and glanced toward the mound. Those Hereford lot looked bored, Bet they've seen better in actual scraps. Jenkins nodded, wiping rain from his brow. I and her, Harper, still plodding along like it's a stroll. Must be why they're ignoring us. Their words carried low, a habitual undercurrent, but the SAS group's proximity lent them an unintended edge, audible in the brief lull. Hargrove, sensing the shift, approached the mound with purposeful strides, his boots sinking slightly into the sodden turf. "Captain, if you'd care to demonstrate a tactical integration for the cadets' benefit, the exercise calls for it." Thorne considered the request, his expression unchanging, then nodded once. "Very well, Major. A brief overview." He descended the mound without flourish, Hale at his side, the pair moving to the firing point, with the economy of men accustomed to shadows. The platoon formed a loose semicircle at Wilkins' order, rifles grounded, attention forward. The rain eased to a drizzle, beading on berets and shoulders, the chill seeping through wool. Thorne positioned himself at the center lane, selecting an SA-80 from the rack with detached familiarity. No preamble, he simply chambered around, assumed the prone stance, and fired a string of 5, deliberate, unhurried. The targets shredded at the vitals, the shots blending into a seamless rhythm. Hale followed, demonstrating a flank cover from the adjacent position, their coordination silent, instinctive. The cadets watched, a mix of awe and envy rippling through the ranks. Reynolds straightened, whispering to Jenkins, "Flash, isn't it? But we've got the basics down." Yet as Thorne rose, clearing his weapon with mechanical precision, his path led him past Harper's lane. She stood at attention, her rifle at the slope, awaiting dismissal. He paused there, not abruptly, but with the natural halt of inspection. The platoon stilled, sensing the anomaly in the routine. Thorne's eyes met hers again, holding for a beat longer than protocol allowed. "Lance Corporal," he said, his voice low and even, carrying just far enough for those nearest to hear. "Your grouping was exemplary. Reminds me of a selection I once oversaw." No elaboration, but the words hung, waited. Harper's posture remained rigid, her response a simple, "Thank you, sir," delivered without inflection. Yet in that exchange, Thorne's gaze flicked to her sleeve, where the cuff had shifted during the prone, exposing the winged dagger once more, faint but unmistakable to those who knew. Hale stepped forward then, his presence drawing the platoon's focus. As a senior warrant in the regiment, his authority was unspoken, derived from deeds unrecorded. He addressed the group broadly, his tone clipped and professional. "In joint operations, integration saves lives, discipline in the details, stance, breath, follow-through. That's what binds units." His eyes, however, settled on Harper. Some here demonstrate it without need for instruction. Brevity in action. The call sign slipped out naturally, as if recounting a briefing, but it landed like a dropped pin in the hush. Whispers stirred among the cadets, Morrow frowning, Reynolds exchanging a puzzled glance with Jenkins. Brevity. It meant nothing to them, yet Thorne's stillness amplified it, his nod to Harper, a subtle affirmation. Wilkins, ever the enforcer of order, cleared his throat. "Platoon, attention." But before the command fully took, Thorne raised a hand. Minimal, authoritative. "One moment, Color Sergeant." He turned fully to face the semicircle, his bearing shifting to parade ground formality. The rain pattered on, but the air thickened with anticipation. "This cadet," he continued, gesturing toward Harper without drama, "is not what her records suggest. Transferred under discretion, yes, but her service traces to Credenhill, the Black Wing." The words were factual, delivered in the dry cadence of a debrief, yet they rippled outward. Cadets shifted, boots scraping the gravel, faces paling as realization dawned. Credenhill, Hereford's heart, the SAS forge, the Black Wing, whispered legend, where only the unbreakable trained in unmarked voids. Thorne's voice remained level. 2 years passed. During a classified insertion in the Helmand corridor, a team from the regiment was compromised. Bad intel, ambush in the green zone. Brevity here. Lance Corporal Harper, then attached to signals, was on overwatch. Spotted the breach, held the line solo for extraction, saved 8 of ours. medal classified naturally. No embellishment. The facts stood bare like a field report. Hale added quietly, "That tattoo? Earned in the hills. Known only to us." The winged dagger gleamed briefly as Harper's sleeve caught the light. Now a mark of honor, not anomaly. The platoon froze, the hierarchy's rigid lines blurring in the revelation. Reynolds' mouth parted, color draining from his face. Jenkins stared at the ground, the anteroom's tug on her sleeve replaying in his mind as folly. Morrow's eyes widened in quiet respect, while others exchanged glances, the mockery's echo turning to shame. Wilkins stood immobile, his moustache twitching faintly, recognition dawning on even the veteran. Hargrove at the periphery saluted subtly, the gesture rippling through the officers. Thorne stepped back, addressing Harper directly. "At ease, brevity." The old call sign, invoked publicly, sealed it. She lowered her rifle fractionally, her expression unchanging, reserved, internal, but a subtle release in her shoulders betrayed the weight lifted. No salute from her, the regiment's code demanded understatement. Yet Thorne held her gaze, his own posture a mirror of respect, still unyielding. The moment stretched, the drizzle veiling the square like a curtain drawn on the past. Shame spread through the ranks, not in outbursts, but in averted eyes and straightened backs, respect rising from the silence. As Thorne and Hale withdrew to the mound, the platoon dispersed under Wilkins's subdued order, the tramp of boots subdued, introspective. Harper fell in last, her stride as before, but now the space around her widened, not with disdain but deference. The public reckoning had unfolded without fanfare. A quiet fracture in the Academy's order, transformative in its restraint. In the cold precision of British military life, such revelations bound tighter than commands, honoring the hidden sacrifices that underpinned the whole. The rain continued, washing the range clean, as the true measure of discipline emerged from the shadows. The drizzle persisted, as the platoon stood in uneasy formation on the range, the air thick with the metallic tang of spent rounds and the earthy musk of rain-soaked soil. Captain Thorne's revelation hung over the group like the low clouds, unspoken yet palpable, binding the cadets in a collective hush. No one moved at first. The only sound was the soft patter on their oilskins and the distant call of a rook wheeling over the hills. Lance Corporal Harper remained at the slope, her rifle a steady weight in her hands, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the Thames Valley blurred into grey. Her face betrayed nothing, no triumph, no vindication, just the quiet resolve that had carried her through Credenhill's unforgiving trials. Thorne, flanked by Sergeant Hale, held his position at the front of the semicircle, his posture unyielding as the Academy's stone walls. He did not raise his voice for emphasis. In the regiment, authority flowed from stillness, not spectacle. Slowly, deliberately, he brought his hand to his brow in salute, not the crisp snap of parade ground formality, but a measured acknowledgement, held just long enough to convey the depth of respect earned in shadowed operations. The gesture rippled through the observers, Hale mirroring it with a nod, his scarred features softening fractionally, while Major Hargrove, from his vantage on the mound, straightened and returned it in kind. Wilkins, the colour sergeant, shifted his weight, his broad frame tensing as he processed the implications, his own oversight in the quiet cadet now laid bare. "Brevity," Thorne said again, the call sign emerging like a classified dispatch, low and precise. It was not a command but an invocation of shared history. The nights in the Helmand dust, where her signals work had pierced the chaos, relaying coordinates that pulled a pinned-down squadron from the jaws of ambush. "Your discretion served us well then. It serves here." The words were for her alone, yet they carried to the platoon, each syllable etching the truth into the damp air. Harper met his eyes, her own steady, a faint incline of her head the only response. No words from her. The Black Wing had taught that silence amplified deeds, not diluted them. The base, Sandhurst's sprawling expanse of squares and barracks, seemed to freeze in that instant, as if the rain itself paused in deference. Cadets who had moments before whispered barbs now stood immobile, their boots rooted in the mud. Reynolds's face, usually flushed with easy mockery, drained to pallor. his eyes darting to Jenkins, who stared at the ground, the memory of his anteroom grasp twisting like a knot in his gut. The tug on her sleeve, once a jest, now loomed as an unwitting desecration of service unmarked on any public roll. Morrow the peacemaker swallowed hard, his earlier discomfort blooming into quiet awe. Even the peripheral ranks, those who had chuckled from afar, averted their gazes, postures correcting involuntarily, shoulders squaring as shame seeped through the lines like cold groundwater. Wilkins broke the stasis first, his voice a rumble tempered by newfound gravity. "Platoon, stand at ease." The command lacked its usual bark, emerging almost reflective, as if recalibrating the hierarchy he had enforced for decades. The cadets responded sluggishly, rifles lowering, but the movement carried a weight of introspection. No one spoke. The mockery's residue dissolved in the revelation's wake, replaced by a spreading respect that manifested not in applause, but in the subtle adjustments of bearing, the way a private straightened his beret without prompting, or how Jenkins stepped back a pace from Reynolds, creating space around Harper as if her presence now demanded it. Hargrove descended the mound, his approach measured, boots sinking into the turf with soft crunches. He halted beside Thorne, his trimmed beard glistening with raindrops. "Captain, this changes the briefing parameters." It was an understatement phrased in the clipped idiom of staff officers, but his eyes on Harper held a glint of institutional recalibration. "Lance Corporal, your record will be amended for the exercise logs. Full integration." No apology, British military decorum forbade such overtures, but the acknowledgement was clear. From this moment, her quiet competence would inform the platoon's drills, her input sought in tactical huddles, rather than dismissed as administrative shadow. Thorne nodded, his salute complete, hand dropping to his side with economical grace. "The regiment values its own, Major, always." He turned then to Hale, a glance signalling withdrawal, and the pair moved toward the Land Rovers without further ceremony. Their departure was unobtrusive, engines humming to life with restrained power, tires gripping the gravel as they receded toward the perimeter road. Yet their influence lingered, a quiet reform etching into the academy's rhythms. Wilkins dismissed the platoon for equipment stowage, his orders now laced with deference. "Harper, oversee the section clear down, your lead." It was the first such directive, unprompted, her role elevated not by fanfare, but by the silent consensus of reform. As the cadets filed toward the armory sheds, the group's dynamic shifted palpably. Reynolds fell in behind Harper, his usual swagger muted, a murmured "Sorry, Lance Corporal" escaping under his breath. Barely audible but sincere in its brevity. Jenkins nodded mutely as he passed, handing her his cleaning rod without request, eyes downcast. The shame spread not as recrimination, but as a collective realignment, respect rising through the ranks like mist from the warming earth. Whispers that had once carried derision now turned to fragments of legend. Credenhill, Black Wing, saved the regiment. No exaggeration. The facts sufficed, burnished by the restraint of their telling. Harper accepted the tools, her movements unchanged, methodical, unadorned, directing the section with soft-spoken precision. Barrels first, then slings, check tolerances. The cadets complied without demur, their efforts sharpened, as if her hidden past had infused the mundane with purpose. The rain slackened to a fine spray, the sun's pale disk edging through the clouds, casting long shadows across the range. In the distance the parade square gleamed wetly, ready for the evening's stand-to. Sandhurst's rigid hierarchy endured, but it bent now, accommodating the moral courage that had simmered unseen. By stand-down, as lamps flickered on in the barracks blocks, the transformation settled. No one mocked the quiet transfer anymore. Instead, a subtle deference marked interactions. Seats yielded in the anteroom, queries directed her way during briefings. Wilkins, over a mug of tea in the sergeant's mess, reflected aloud to Hargrove. "Discipline's not just orders, sir, it's knowing when to recognize it." The major nodded, the academy's order reformed, quieter but stronger. Harper, alone in her bunk as lights dimmed, felt the weight lift incrementally, not in euphoria but in the internal ease of vindication earned through endurance. The base's cold air carried on, but now with an undercurrent of honor, silent as the winged dagger concealed once more beneath her cuff. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Ellis Harper reach those who still believe in honor. The weeks following the revelation on the range unfolded with the inexorable rhythm of Sandhurst's calendar, each dawn bringing the bugle's insistent call and the parade square's unyielding gravel underfoot. The rain came and went in fits, mirroring the subtle shifts within the platoon, damp mornings giving way to tentative clears, much like the cadets' evolving regard for Lance Corporal Ellis Harper. No grand announcements marked the change. The Academy's traditions abhorred such theatrics. Instead, reform seeped in through the cracks of routine, a straightened posture here, a deferred glance there, the quiet alchemy of respect, forged in the wake of truth. By mid-morning on the first full day after Captain Thorne's departure, the platoon reassembled for tactical maneuvers across the Academy's wooded training grounds. The air held the crisp bite of autumn, laced with the scent of pine resin and leaf mulch underfoot. Colour Sergeant Wilkins led the formation, his stride as purposeful as ever. But his briefings now carried an undercurrent of inclusion. "Harper, take point on the overwatch detail," he directed during the initial huddle, his voice steady, eyes meeting hers without the former detachment. It was the first such assignment, unprompted by hierarchy's rote, a nod to her shadowed expertise that rippled through the ranks without a word. The cadets fell in behind, their boots crunching over the leaf-strewn paths, SA-80s slung at the ready. Reynolds, who had once led the chorus of mockery, now positioned himself a pace to her flank, his usual banter silenced. During the advance through the mock ambush zone, low hedges simulating Afghan cover, he adjusted his spacing without comment, mirroring her economical signals. A raised fist for halt, a subtle wave for proceed. No apology lingered on his lips. In the British way, action sufficed, mending fractures through competence rather than confession. Jenkins, trailing in the rear guard, kept his distance, his broad frame hunched slightly against the chill. The anteroom's impulsive grasp, a private regret etched in averted eyes. As the exercise progressed, Harper directed the section with restrained authority. Her voice low, commands clipped, "Flank left, cover the draw." The cadets responded with uncharacteristic precision, their movements syncing to her lead, as if the Black Wing's discipline had transferred by osmosis. Morrow, the quiet observer, offered a brief "well done" during the debrief, his Midlands accent soft, the phrase landing like a quiet affirmation. Whispers that had once carried derision now shifted to fragments of awe, exchanged in the barracks after lights out. Heard she held that line alone. 8 of them out. No embellishment. The facts, sparse as a signals dispatch, sufficed to elevate her from outsider to quiet legend. The transformation extended beyond the platoon, threading through the Academy's broader fabric. In the mess hall, where the clatter of trays and the steam of boiled vegetables once amplified isolation, seats now opened naturally around Harper's chosen bench. Cadets from adjacent sections, strangers until then, nodded in passing, their greetings formal yet warm. "Morning, Lance Corporal." Major Hargrove, during a staff review in the officers' mess, amended her file with understated efficiency, noting her Credenhill attachment in the classified annex. "Full operational parity," he murmured to Wilkins over tea, the colour sergeant nodding gravely. "She's shaped the intake already, sir, without a fuss." Afternoons brought field exercises that tested the reformed dynamic. Night navigation across the Surrey Downs, where fog rolled in like Hellman's shroud. Harper led a fire team through the unmarked terrain, her compass work flawless, pace steady against the wind's bite. Reynolds, paired with her for the leg, stumbled once on a root-hidden dip, his curse swallowed by the gale. She extended a hand without pause, firm, brief, pulling him upright. "Steady," she said simply, the word carrying no rebuke, only the echo of shared endurance. He nodded, falling in step, the incident binding them in silence rather than spectacle. Evenings in the anteroom evolved subtly, the panelled hall's lamplight casting long shadows over armchairs, and the samovar's gentle steam. The mockery's ghosts had dissipated. In their place, tentative conversations bloomed around Harper's corner. Cadets posed questions now. Not probing barbs, but genuine inquiries. "How's the wind red on the downs, Lance Corporal?" Morrow asked one night, mug in hand. She responded measuredly, sketching a quick diagram on a napkin. Overwatch angles, signal relays, her explanations grounded in the Black Wing's unforgiving lessons. Jenkins listened from afar, contributing a rare question on bayonet retention, his tone respectful, the sleeve tug's shame transmuted into diligence. Wilkins observed it all from the threshold, his moustache twitching in quiet approval. In the sergeant's mess, over pipes and the faint aroma of aged whiskey, he confided to peers, "The regiment's mark runs deep, turns boys into soldiers without them knowing." The academy's hierarchy, rigid as the parade square's lines, accommodated her legacy seamlessly, no promotions announced, no medals pinned in fanfare. Yet her influence permeated. Drill instructors sought her input on formations, her quiet competence becoming the platoon's unspoken standard. As winter edged closer, the rain turning to sleet that lashed the windows, Harper's isolation yielded to a reserved camaraderie. She remained the quiet one, posture straight, words sparse, but the deference grew organic, a quiet legend woven into Sandhurst's lore. Reynolds, during a rare stand-easy, approached with a mug of tea, offering it without flourish. "For the Overwatch," he said, the gesture bridging the chasm his mockery had carved. She accepted with a nod, the exchange sealing the reform. In the barracks hush before Reveille, Harper lay awake some nights, the cold air seeping through the stone walls, carrying the distant echo of boots on gravel. The transformation was internal for her too, a subtle easing of the burden. Honor recognized not in acclaim, but in the platoon's straightened ranks and silenced doubts. British discipline thrived on such restraint, moral courage unspoken, yet binding the whole. Silent honor, like the winged dagger beneath her cuff, endured beyond the square's confines, a legacy etched in the quiet professionalism that defined the regiment and the ranks it touched. The academy pressed on, its routines unbroken, but forever altered by the shadow of one cadet's hidden truth. Winter deepened its hold on Sandhurst, the academy's grounds transforming under a blanket of frost that crunched beneath boots at Reveille. The Thames Valley, visible from the higher drill squares, lay shrouded in frequent fog, the air sharp with the scent of wood fires from the distant villages and the perpetual damp of wool drying in the barracks. Months had passed since Captain Thorne's revelation on the range, yet its echoes lingered in the platoon's cadence, a subtle recalibration that infused the routines with newfound gravity. Lance Corporal Ellis Harper moved through it all with the same unassuming precision, her uniform pressed without excess, her orders delivered in the clipped tones of one who had long mastered restraint. The platoon had evolved under her quiet influence, the hierarchy's rigid lines softening just enough to accommodate shared respect. Morning parades now carried a different rhythm. Cadets aligned more sharply, their heels striking gravel with an attentiveness born of lessons absorbed. Reynolds, once the instigator of barbs, had taken to volunteering for the more demanding watches, night patrols across the foggy downs, where he sought Harper's counsel on signal protocols without prompting. "Wind shifting east, Lance Corporal," he might say during a briefing, his Surrey accent subdued, awaiting her nod before adjusting the team's formation. No overt apologies marred their exchanges. In the British military tradition, redemption came through diligence, not declaration. Jenkins, broader and more taciturn since the anteroom incident, channeled his regret into physical rigor. During bayonet drills on the slick parade square, he paired with Harper unbidden, his thrusts and parries mirroring her economical form. The colour sergeant noted it during inspections, his moustache twitching in approval as he passed their section. "Standards holding," Wilkins would grunt, his gaze lingering on Harper's flawless alignment, a silent endorsement that rippled through the ranks. The mess hall, once a stage for isolation, now hummed with subdued inclusion. Trays balanced side by side, conversations turning to tactical nuances over mugs of strong tea, the steam rising like mist from the cookhouse pots. Major Hargrove's reforms extended beyond the platoon, threading into the academy's broader operations. Harper's classified attachment to Credenhill was referenced in staff memos, not flaunted, but integrated into joint exercises with visiting units. During a winter maneuver simulating urban clearance in the wooded training areas, she led a signals team, her relays crisp and unerring, guiding the advance through simulated interference. The cadets under her watched closely, their earlier mockery transmuted into emulation. Morrow sketching her diagrams in his notebook, others practicing the steady breath of Overwatch in the chill evenings. Whispers in the barracks had shifted entirely, no longer tales of oddity, but fragments of legend shared in low tones before lights out. Brevity in the green zone, one might murmur, the call sign invoked like a talisman, evoking the Hellman shadows without embellishment. Wilkins, ever the guardian of discipline, confided in the sergeant's mess one fog-bound night, the room warmed by a low fire and the aroma of pipe tobacco. "She's the sort that reminds us why we serve," he said to Hargrove over a measure of whiskey, the major nodding as embers crackled softly. "Quiet courage, holds the line without fanfare." The academy's routines persisted unchanged on the surface: roll calls at dawn, inspections under leaden skies, the bugle's farewell at dusk. Yet beneath, Harper's legacy wove through it all, her presence a quiet anchor. Cadets from other platoons sought her out during Stand Easy, their questions respectful. "How do you read the ambush signs, ma'am?" she answered sparingly, her responses grounded in the Blackwing's unforgiving truths. Foggy runs through the break-ons, where survival hinged on observation, not outburst. As spring hinted at arrival, thawing the frost-laced paths and bringing the first green shoots to the academy's borders, Harper's transformation within the ranks solidified. She received no public commendation. The regiment's code abhorred such visibility. Instead, deference manifested in small, enduring ways: a cleared path on the gravel during marches, priority in the armory queue, the colour sergeant's occasional carry-on lance corporal laced with genuine regard. Reynolds and Jenkins, now fixtures in her fire team, stood a fraction taller in her shadow, their growth a testament to the moral tension resolved. The base's cold air, once a companion to her silence, now carried the warmth of institutional respect, earned through endurance, not acclaim. In the quiet hours before Reveille, Harper stood at her bunk's window, gazing out at the parade square where lamps glowed faintly against the pre-dawn dark. The night's frost etched patterns on the glass, mirroring the internal reserve she had always maintained. The injustice of mockery had faded like morning mist, replaced by a legacy of silent honor that bound the platoon tighter. British discipline, she reflected, thrived not in heroic flourishes, but in the subtle interplay of posture and perseverance, the unspoken pact that upheld the regiment and the ranks alike. Sandhurst's traditions endured, fortified by such quiet transformations, where moral courage emerged from the shadows to redefine the whole. The academy pressed forward, its boots echoing eternally, a testament to the restrained professionalism that defined them all. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching The Case of Ellis Harper. See you in the next one.